404, this is 7, stand by a minute. Just come on, what is your attack angle?
Okay, talk to him, see what that did. Charlie Horse, 88.
24, traffic 275.
85 just made a pass in there. Can you give us any?
Okay, I'll put it a little closer than those trees. Let me come around with a loud 3 and I'll put it on those trees there. Roger that, loud 3.
Tell me your name and your rank, please.
Sir, John Wilkinson. I retired as a Brigadier General in 2001, actually. And of course, I was commissioned as a second lieutenant and spent 8 years on active duty, got out off of active duty, went into the reserves, and eventually ended up as the senior reserve intelligence officer in the Air Force for 5 years.
What year were you in Southeast Asia?
10 October 68 to 10 October 69. Actually, it's not quite right. It was supposed to be 10 October 68 when we departed Travis. The airplane broke down in Tokyo, so we spent 3 days waiting for a replacement engine, and then we flew into Bangkok. And interesting story. Spent the first night in Bangkok at the Bangkok Officers Open Mess, Chow Pia Hotel. And the next morning, having breakfast, ran into a guy wearing a tiger suit, little floppy hat, big mustache. And he said, "Oh, you guys are," and there's 3 of us together, "You guys are new." Well, we were wearing 1505s, and of course we were, we looked like we were stateside. And he said, "So you're going where?" "Oh, to 8th TAC Fighter Wing." "And where are you going?" "Oh, I'm going to the 713th at Udorn." "And where are you going?" I said, "Oh, I'm going to 602nd NKP." He said, "They don't know you're coming." "Oh, what do you mean?" He says, "They don't know you're coming." He says, "So, don't rush to get up there." I said, "Really?" He goes, "Hey, you can believe me, I'm a captain, right?" Well, I should have known better. But so we stayed in Bangkok for a couple of days, went to see temples and, did whatever, and then started feeling a little guilty that the war might be over before we got there. And so we went to Don Muang, flew up. I was the last guy off the C-130 at NKP. And my first impression was, this is Burma in 1942. PSP runway. Every airplane there had a propeller on it, and it was like, the end of the world. And in fact, on the tower, it said, "Welcome to Nakhon Phanom, Baroda Thai Air Force Base, elevation," and it said at the bottom, "Welcome to the end of the world." So, and when I got there, I checked into the squadron, 602nd, went in, talked to the sergeant that was there, showed him my orders. He looked at them, he looked at me, went in, talked to the boss, and he said, "Colonel, we'll see you now." And I could hear the colonel say to him, "Do we have an intelligence officer?" "Oh, yeah, okay, maybe we do." So I go in and salute. He goes, "Hey, we weren't expecting you." And I'm going, I could have spent the war in Bangkok. They wouldn't have noticed, right? So anyway, that was my introduction to NKP. But
So let's talk a little bit about Task Force Alpha, if we could.
Task Force Alpha, yep.
Give us an overview from your perspective of what it was, and if you could tell us how it was utilized in intelligence.
Yeah.
And was it revolutionary at that time for what it did?
In a way, yes. Revolutionary, yes. In that, in looking back on it, it was the introduction of, I guess, one of the first introductions of more advanced technology into the issue of understanding the battlefield and shaping the battlefield through responses afforded, options, I should say, afforded by that technology. I've read recently several studies that praised Task Force Alpha for directly being responsible for killing several tens of thousands of trucks on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. To me, the reality was different. I mean, the killing was being done by aircraft flying out of the wing, aircraft flying out of Ubon, aircraft flying out of Karat, Takli, Udorn. And a lot of the times the targeting was being done by people like me, who we didn't have that much experience, but at least because we lived with the pilots and worked with them every day, I think in many ways I had a better understanding, and I mean I just because I was on the same base as Task Force Alpha. We had a better understanding of the battlefield conditions and battlefield, the who, what, and wheres, in many ways that TFA did. I mean, TFA was a good indicator, very good indicator, and often a very quick indicator, more real time than not. But it was where things I don't think worked so well was the integration between what Task Force Alpha was doing and eventually what the air crews were actually striking at and the conditions that they were working under. So, interestingly, I had an opportunity during Intel school to be assigned to Task Force Alpha. Somehow or other, the commandant of the school at the time, when we were at Lowry Air Force Base, he had met my parents. They were living in Florida. They were living in Florida at the time. Somehow he'd met my parents or had been introduced to them or something, and he said he was scheduled to go to TFA as a director of intelligence, and he would like me to go as part of his staff. And I said, well, I appreciate that, but I don't think I want to do that. And he said, why not? I said, well, I know that we've been told, because we were graduating in August, that the entire class was going to go to Vietnam or Southeast Asia. I said, but there's always the chance that I won't. So I'm just going to put in for some stateside bases that are near beaches. And he kind of looked at me and he went, you're so hopeless, I can't believe it, And so he said, okay, fine, whatever. Well, when the orders came out, they were reading the orders, and the lead instructor for the school said, okay, I've got the orders, and this one I'm going to announce last. And then he started giving out, so-and-so 7th Air Force, so-and-so 7th Air Force, so-and-so 7th, 13th Air Force, whatever TAC fighter wing, here, there, the other place. A couple guys to TFA. And he said, and the last one, me, says, you're going to the 602nd Fighter Squadron Commando at NKP. And I went, oh, he said, that's where Task Force Alpha is. And I went, yeah, I know.
No beach near there.
No beach near there. Actually, yeah, in the low tide or in the dry months, there was a lot of beach showing in the Mekong, but yeah, nothing you'd want to go to. But anyway, but a couple of my classmates went to TFA, and I also had, for a variety of reasons, I graduated with a top secret clearance. Everybody else had a secret clearance. I had a top secret clearance based on some stuff, the fact that I'd been born overseas and so forth. So I was made, as a second lieutenant, I was made the contact with TFA for any highly classified messages which we could not get directly at the TUOC, the Tactical Units Operations Center. But TFA would call on the secure phone and say, we have a message. We have a message that you need to read, okay, or it needs to be read, right, whatever. So I did have contact with TFA. My first impression, frankly, when I actually got to NKP, and the next morning I was going to the Oak Club for breakfast, I ran into one of my classmates who'd also been my roommate in the apartment we rented along with two other guys. And he was at TFA, and he'd arrived a month before me, and he was on his way to play softball. Oh, okay, well, that seems pretty normal. And then I discovered that the TFA people all slept in air-conditioned trailers. They had a lot of money, and they worked 8-hour days. So, okay, and of course, our conditions were different.
I believe you told me how vastly different they were. Can you go ahead and tell about?
They were pretty different. There was the standard for non-pilots and non-senior officers, majors above, more senior, I should say. Actually, even some major. Basically, there was 4 of us to a room. The hooches had, I think the first one I was in had 12 rooms. Then there was a communal bathroom and shower, and then another hooch across the grassy area with another 12 rooms. Each room had 4 people in it, so there's almost 100 people. 4 showers, 4 toilets, 4 sinks, that kind of stuff. And the rooms were not, the buildings were not air conditioned, and in the case of, I had the upper bunk, there was 4 of us in this room. All of us were intel officers working at the TUOC. And the walls started a foot off the ground and ended 8 feet above the ground. So I was in the upper deck, upper bunk, and I could see, if I sat up, I could see all the way across the building. And I could hear all the way across the building. And you're listening to, well, the 3 guys, usually they were asleep or whatever, but there was another 45, 44 people, and they're making noise, you know, and it was hot and it was sticky and it sucked, and these other guys are sleeping in air-conditioned quarters. But, you know, it's the little things that kind of make the war. But anyway, so, but huge, a lot of computerized capability. I mean, the whole story was obviously they were implanting, not they, but sensors were being implanted along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and the sensors were acoustic. And because of the way that the missions were being flown in terms of implanting the sensors, TFA had a good, I'd say quite good map of where the sensors were, and they were dropped at certain intervals, so they had, you know, equal distances mostly, and they were placed on roads that were known to be high use and so forth. And being acoustic, they could then hear, because there was a couple different systems, but there were airborne systems that were basically taking the signals from the acoustic sensors and relaying them to Task Force Alpha, where they were being analyzed. So some reacted to the sound of trucks, some you could actually hear people talking. They never, certainly when I was there, and I don't think they ever did, they never developed the capability to strike on sensor, if you would, i.e., why, you know, where exactly are all those people so we can welcome them to the war. And so, but they kept working on that. Besides the fact that they lived in air-conditioned quarters, trailers, and were working 8, maybe 10-hour days, and we were working 12, 14-hour days, but it was fine. We all had everybody has a different war. Here's what I remember. One thing that really struck me is I went up there one time to visit somebody, and that wasn't a visit. We were working on a project together between them and us. And of course, we wore fatigues or flight suits, and we wore combat boots and all that. And I arrived at the door to TFA, let myself in. There's a guard, checks my ID, and he says, "Sir, I need you to go put the booties on." What are you talking about? You have to wear, because you have combat boots, you need to wear slip-on booties over your combat boots. I went, why? Well, the new general wants, the floor gets marred and scratched by people walking with combat boots that have stones stuck in them, so he wants to not have that happen. So, put on your booties, little white booties, and you go down to see whoever you're seeing, and and again, and my two former colleagues, they didn't particularly like some of those aspects. But they never felt like they were in the war. Interesting. In fact, one of them said to me as we were leaving, and a year later, he said, I guess my real career will start now as soon as I get to my next assignment. But so anyway, it was good. There's a lot of studies saying it was excellent. I think it was very good in certain circumstances. It was very expensive. A lot of money was put into infrastructure, like a lot of air-conditioned quarters, a lot of booties.
The building was massive.
The building was very large, and it was as far away as you could get from the runway and the operational side of the base as you could get and still be on the base. In fact, at dinner tonight, we were looking at the photo, and people kept saying, "Well, what's that way over here by the edge of the base?" I said, "Oh, that's TFA."
Somebody told me, I think it was like 22,000 square feet.
See, there was a lot of building, there was a lot of air conditioning, there was a lot of generators, there was a lot of
I
stuff.
can't imagine with the power draw. With the computers they were using back then,
Right, yeah.
They were not efficient. They were monsters,
No, they were, yeah, and it was, I never got into very much of the building because most of the guys I had to see were like on the one floor. I guess there was more than one floor. I never did look into it that deeply. I figured, well, the less I know, the better, in terms of my own peace of mind, I suppose. But anyway, so I think it was effective. I'll tell you one more anecdote. Obviously, the trucks moved primarily, pretty much only in the dry season. Okay, there were some outriders that would be able to move okay while it was still sort of muddy, but at some point everything got shut down. And I remember being in one of the offices, and there's guys with their little headsets on, and they're listening, and this guy says, he says, we're getting all these indications that there's traffic at certain points of the route structure, and they were very near, just on the Laos side of the North Vietnamese border. And I said, yeah. And he said, wow, I wonder why. Because they haven't been moving. And I said, well, have you been outside lately? What do you mean? I said, it's not raining anymore. I said, the trucks move when it doesn't rain. Oh. And I'm thinking,
How can you not know?
I mean, yeah, you are confirming what you, well, I mean, the hobos were flying out there. You know, the guys, Spectre was flying out there, and Nimrods were flying out there, and they were saying, yeah, there's trucks are starting, you know. And anyway, I had attitude problems. I guess I've been told I have attitude problems still, you know.
It's a checks and balance system, fellas. It's not hard, you know.
Yeah, I suppose. But anyway, that's my memory of Task Force Alpha.
It was a very unique program.
It was exceedingly unique. It's interesting. They were so, in some ways, so self-contained that the two guys that that were in my class that were there, I saw one of them once in 12 months on the base, and the other one I saw him 3 times. You know, and it's...
That doesn't shock me. Early on, I would have been shocked by that, but the more I have done these interviews, it seemed compartmentalization was an overriding plan, and there wasn't a lot of overlap.
It was very compartmentalized.
Very purposeful.
Yes, yeah, purposefully, exactly. I mean, it was a highly classified, compartmented program at the time. I was, myself and the boss, who was Colonel Lambert, Lieutenant Colonel Lambert, we both had unescorted access to the building. Other people could go if they had a meeting or whatever there. But they had to be escorted. And we weren't escorted because we had TS clearances, he and I. But it was sort of like, it was a lot of data, a lot of algorithms, a lot of reports of reactions by the sensors, but there was no, that I could tell, it was very little that was directed operationally to the units that were flying the missions to kill the trucks. A lot of the information was going back up to PACAF headquarters, 7th Air Force, headquarters in Saigon, PACAF, Pentagon, White House, whatever.
That was before it was turned around and brought back for action, correct? It was being filtered all the way up through those levels.
Well, there was possibly, I mean, we would get, interesting point, we would get, there was somebody from TFA who would come down at some point in the day, usually it was late afternoon, and they would brief potential targets based on sensor reactions. I never sat through any of the briefings, which a lot of them were basically, here's the root structure, here's where we've detected movement, because they were briefing basically the night hobos and then the Zorros when that was stood up as its own squadron. And they were briefing the Nimrods, the A-26s that flew out at night, and the Candlesticks, the night control, FAC control aircraft out there. So I didn't, because I was briefing Fireflies and Sandys, 602nd, I didn't ever sit through one of those. However, 5 years after I rotated out, I actually served at Defense Intelligence Agency with a guy who'd been one of the briefers for TFA. We had overlapped by about 6 months. He left. It turns out that I was there for his second 6 months when I first got there, and so forth. And he had been briefing. Oh yeah, I used to go to the TUAC every day and every evening and brief targets, potential targets. And it was interesting because he was a good friend, but he said to me one time, he said, I never really liked pilots. And I went, well, you found them to be crude and self-centered. And I said, yeah, it's pretty cool, don't you think?
You were high on his list after that.
No, we were good friends. We were actually good friends, but it was like, my first thought was, how could you spend a career in the Air Force and, quote, not like pilots? I mean, certainly individuals I didn't like, but, the whole pilot fraternity, now fraternity sorority, was like, I thought it was cool, I mean, yeah, what the hell, right? And, let's go out and do something, but it was, and that sort of, to me, embodied like, well, yeah, we'll give you this information, but, just go do something. We got bigger fish to fry. Anyway, so.
Wow.
Sorry it takes so
No,
long.
no, that's wonderful. That's really what I was hoping to get, is a little better picture of Task Force Alpha. I've had several people recently telling me little bits and pieces, and I think this will all fit together in a nice flow. So.
I mean, it was, they spent a lot of money. They lived relatively well. I mean, we were all there for 12 months.
How much do you think Task Force Alpha possibly led us to where we are today with our technological advances? Because that would have been like the very first moment of
well, it was McNamara's electronic wall, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so, yeah, I mean, it was I think an interesting and useful first application of technology. Useful because I have to assume that somebody somewhere in the defense establishment learned a lot about what was possible, but also what was not possible.
Mm-hmm. Well, you were talking about the data. I mean, I've been working in technology, I don't know, 15 years. And we're finally at the point where supercomputers can take big data and make sense out of it. I mean,
right.
They were trying to take that much data back then that it would have been almost impossible to glean a greater picture. Where I could see where they were pulling pieces and parts of it and understanding that, but to take the entire complexity and make it work instantaneously, yeah, that's a lot.
I mean, because a lot of on the operational side of things down at the wing, and again, sitting there, not being at TFA and not sitting through the briefings, a lot of it was, NAILFAC could come back one day and say, hey, I'm starting to see tire tracks, and hey, I'm starting to get AAA reaction. When there hasn't been any AAA reaction for the last month or 2 months. So everybody said, oh, yeah, trucks must be coming, trucks soon come,
I remember there was a Green Beret that came back and reported that he had seen tank tracks. And it went up the line and they said, nope, you must have seen a bulldozer track. And he said, I know the difference between a tank track and a bulldozer. He said, I'm telling you, those are tanks. And that was right before, and everybody ignored it, and that was right before Battle of Lang Bay when the tanks
showed
over
up.
the camp, and he was like, they were.
Yeah. It was interesting. We actually saw and struck, we detected, saw a couple of, basically there were PT-76s wandering around northern Laos.
What is that?
It's a light, medium size Soviet tank.
Okay.
But we'd never seen tanks up there. And somebody, guy come back, says, I saw a tank, Oh, yeah, right. I said, no, I saw a tank. Well, it must have been a bulldozer. No, I saw a tank. And they went out and looked, and there was a tank. And, of course, it was on the main road that came out of the Fish's Mouth. I guess it was Route 5 or 6, maybe 5. That came out of the Fish's Mouth. And this tank, it was a PT-76, was looked like it was headed for the PDJ, but it had been hit before that. And when we reported that back to 7th Air Force, they basically, their first reaction was, no, you guys are, smoking dope. And the first question was, you mean a water tank? No, we mean a tank. Well, it must have been a bulldozer. No, it was a tank. So we, that kind of, I don't know why, I don't even know why I told you the story, but it was interesting in that people just didn't believe what people were seeing in many cases. I guess that's the real story. Yeah, I mean, they didn't expect to see them. Oh, they don't have tanks. Certainly the Pathet Lao didn't have any tanks, and the NVA had better use for their tanks. So what's it doing over here in northern Laos? Well, I don't know, but there it is. It's like, okay, but so.
So one of the other things we wanted to talk about was you had received a message at one point where you had read about a possible North Vietnamese trap, anti-aircraft trap we were going to talk about.
Oh yeah, that really sucked.
Can you lead us through that a little bit?
Yeah.
Do you remember what flight that was?
It was a Spectre. I believe, I'm pretty certain it was the 24 May of 1969. Because I've gone back and read some records, and there was, this certainly computes with what I experienced. Because I had the top secret clearance, I get a call one evening from TFA, and I was just getting ready to knock off for the day, because normally my day would start around 4 in the morning, and then I'd usually by 6 p.m. or 1800, I would be getting ready to pack it in, because our last flight had gone for the night. Our last night flight had already departed, Firefly flight, and the debriefing was being done by a group of enlisted guys who knew what to ask and what to look for and all that, so there's no real need for me to be there. But I get this phone call from TFA saying, hey, we have a message that you need to read. Okay, so get myself, jump in the Jeep, drive up to TFA, get in there, put my booties on, go down, and the guy says, ring the doorbell, show my ID card. Yeah, it looks like you, and you come, sign in, here's the message. Okay, well, the message was from 7th Air Force saying that they had hard evidence that the North Vietnamese along the route structure had set up a AAA trap specifically to shoot down a Spectre. Okay, and that this message, and then when I read the message, I said, oh shit, okay. Well, the night guys were going to go out there, Nimmies and Zorros were headed out there, and so forth, and the Candlesticks. I figured, well, we better get back to brief this, or at least get the night briefers up to speed on that. And the problem there, of course, was you couldn't give them specifics, because they weren't, those briefers were not top secret cleared. So basically it was a process of saying, okay, so 7th Air Force believes that there's going to be a special effort made right around here, point at the map, and you better tell your guys to stay away from there or be real careful in that area. Okay, so that's fine, and that was usually enough for the pilots to understand what was going on. Anyway, so having read this message, and I was getting ready to say, okay, thank you guys, and sign out. They signed the cover sheet and all that. What I noticed was that it was directed not at us. It was a 2 8th TAC fighter wing at Ubon. And we, along with a lot of the other units that were flying in Steel Tiger were CC addressees. So it was just, to us, it was information, we were not the primary recipients. So, well, that was okay, got it. So on the way back to the thwart, I started thinking, I better call this other friend of mine who had been in my class, who was at the 8th TAC Fighter Wing. I said, it's like, shit, it's like 1810. I better call him and ask him if he got the message. And then on the drive back and getting into the building, and it's like getting late, and I'm telling the night briefers about this. I'm starting to think, oh shit, they're the addressees. They got the specters. They must, and I didn't call them. Okay, I didn't call them. Big mistake. At least to me, big mistake, and I still feel it was. I should have called him. Spectre flies into the trap, gets shot up. One guy dies on the airplane. One of the back guys. The airplane is in real bad shape. The pilot, co-pilot managed to get it back to Ubon. They order the back end crew to bail out in the vicinity of the base. Everybody goes out the back, they think. They come in for a landing. Things are not working right. The runway had been foamed, and I don't think, in reading some of the after action, I don't think they were told that. So a lot less friction and all that. So they hit the runway, they skid off the runway, they go through a small building, skid over some more, go through another small building, and then plane starts to burn. Pilot, co-pilot jump out, they start running out through the back. They notice that one of the guys never bailed out, so they collect him and out he goes with them. And then when they start counting noses between what the three that were on the ground, and then later on, as it got more light, the helicopter went out and picked up the guys who bailed out. There was one more guy who was unaccounted for, and they figured that he had been in the airplane all along. And what the condition was. But basically, there was 2 KIAs, destroyed airplane. And that morning, when we read that report, I called my buddy at 8th TAC Fighter Wing. And I said, didn't you get the message? He says, what message? I said, I had to talk around it. I said, because he wasn't top secret clear. I said the 7th Air Force message addressed to you guys at 1800 hours yesterday, having to do with Spectre. So he called me back about 2 hours later. He said, yeah, we found the message. It was stuck in somebody's inbox. Yeah.
How long did that stay with you?
It still does. Anyway, so I use that as an example when I used to talk to the reserve, intel reservists. And actually, I first hit upon saying this soon after I got promoted to GO, and I did a graduation ceremony down at Goodfellow for the intelligence officers course. Actually, I did for both the intelligence and the enlisted course. They graduated the same day. And I said to them, look, I said, and I sort of gave them a little bit of this flavor, not a lot, just basically, I read the message, I thought I should call 8th TAC Fighter Wing, I didn't. 2 people died, airplane was lost, big mess, and the 8th TAC Fighter Wing had never gotten, the people who needed to see it never got it. And I said, every one of you is a moral individual. You wouldn't be here. And every one of you has an inner voice that speaks to you, excuse me, from time to time. And you have to listen to your voice. And then 5 years later, we're at a dinner, awards banquet for reservists. The guy comes up to me, he says, you don't remember me. I went, actually I don't. Sorry, but I don't. I know I should, obviously, but I'm having a bad morning. My brain's just not in sync right now. He said, actually, I was the class leader for that graduating class. And he said, I have always quoted that to my staff and to my, So, hey.
So something good has come of it.
Yeah.
Some lessons are...
maybe narrowly defined to the people who heard it and narrowly defined to the people who actually received the message and reacted to it. My message, not the other one. But, yeah, it's, one of those things you regret. But hey, as we used to say, shit happens.
You were also saying something about, to the effect, no matter how bad your day was in war, it's impossible.
Yeah.
Did you finish that?
Yeah, no matter how bad, no matter what kind of war you're having, somebody's having a worse war than you are today. So, yeah, it's true.
Very prophetic. Because it can get a lot worse.
Yeah, they can. Our war was not great, but some people were having some really bad days, unfortunately. And it's true for every war since and to come. So the best thing to do is, when you know something, say something, right?
Absolutely.
So.
Is there anything else you wanted to discuss today, John?
No, I think it's it.
Well, I want to thank you very much.
Well,
it's always a pleasure to come across you and sit down.
Well, you know what? I really, and I know that all the other guys have said the same thing, but we really appreciate what you're doing in terms of these videos, and we've all, what's it been now? 54 years, and these guys are. It's like the first day you met them, right?
Yeah.
And we appreciate. We really appreciate what you're doing, because there's so many people who don't even know the airplane existed, the A1 for one, but they don't, given how wars have developed and capabilities have developed, and the fact that a lot fewer people are engaged now in actual combat in many circumstances. It's not a video game, and it never has been. And it's good to people to see what some of us old guys were able to do when we were in our 20s and 30s.
I think there are great lessons if somebody will sit down and listen, because no matter what we go through, same problems come up every day. It's how did somebody else solve it?
Right.
I tell my kids all the time, you watch other people's mistakes, because you don't have time in your life to make all those mistakes.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, you're right.
So you need to learn from everything around you, every chance you get.
Yeah, and a lot of, there were a lot of mistakes made along the way to what turned out to be pretty successful effort. And a lot of people don't recognize it, don't believe that it was, or that it was ultimately not successful, which you could argue is an accurate interpretation. But at the time, where we were and where all these guys were, at whichever unit it happened to be, in Thailand or in Vietnam, they were doing what they had been told to do, and they were doing it to the best of their abilities.
I think also, if you let little time settle and you look at situations, you look at Southeast Asia today, those areas, they're incredibly prosperous. Look at Vietnam as a whole.
Well, Vietnam, yeah. Of course, China owns half of the companies in there, but
They've
yeah,
done well in investing.
Yeah, but you know,
Can't take
Laos,
anything away.
Burma's still a mess. Laos is, not the best place to have a vacation, and it just it's the same but different. What my father used to say. It's same but different. So maybe it's human nature. I don't know.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate
Thanks.
it.
Thank
All right.
you.